Claws raked at wood in the dark, over and over frantic, splintering the warped door at the bottom of the stairs. A woman pressed both hands against her swollen belly and backed away. Then she stopped. She grabbed the lantern, gripped the crowbar, and pried the door loose. Cold air rushed up from below, thick and wrong, the smell of something sealed away too long. The half-starved dog bolted down into the black, and she followed, one slow step at a time. 8 months pregnant. Alone in a house nobody had entered in years. At the bottom, Delamere Foster lifted the lantern higher, a wall of fresh brick, a wooden crate nailed shut, scratch marks gouged into the inside of that crate. And in that cold, dark room she finally understood why the place had been abandoned. What was sealed behind that wall? Stay with me on this one. 3 weeks before that cellar door, Delamere Foster had $11 folded into the toe of her shoe and a husband 4 months in the ground. Tom had been a good man. A logging chain snapped wrong on a cold morning, whipped back across the clearing, and that was the end of him. No savings, no insurance, no family left who could take her in. Just a belly growing rounder by the week and a Tennessee winter coming on hard. So she walked into the only bank still open in Marrow Creek and asked the teller if there was any work, any room to let, anything at all. This was 1934, and there wasn't much of anything for anybody. The man behind the counter looked at her the way folks look at a problem they wish would walk back out the door. Then his eyes dropped to her belly and something in his face shifted. "There's a property," he said, "out on the Caldwell Road about 4 miles. The bank's been trying to unload it for years. It's condemned, technically, but nobody's buying anything these days." He leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Tell you what, you give me $1, you sign the paper, and it's yours. We'll call it square and never speak of it again. $1. For a whole house and the land it stood on." Della knew right then that something was wrong. Nobody gives away a roof in the middle of a depression unless the roof comes with a curse attached. She'd learned these last 4 months that the world did not hand a widow anything without a hook hidden in it somewhere. Charity always cost. The question was only how much, so she asked him, plain, what happened out there. The teller fiddled with his pen. "Old man named Amos Caldwell built that place," he said. "Lived alone most of his life. Then about 6 years back he just vanished, walked off the face of the earth. Some say he went to find work up north. Some say worse. Folks who went out to check on him said the house felt off. Said a dog howled in the woods all night and wouldn't let anybody near. After a while people just stopped going. Now they call it the dead house." He shrugged. "But a house is a house. And you, ma'am, look like you need one more than you need to listen to old wives. Here's the thing about being broke and pregnant and widowed all at once. You stop being able to afford your fears. Fear is for people who have something to lose. Della had a baby coming and not a single wall to bring it home to, and between a curse she couldn't see and a cold she could, she'd take her chances with the curse." She pulled a $1 bill from her shoe, smoothed it flat on the counter, and signed her name. Delamere Foster. The teller slid her a rusted iron key and didn't quite meet her eyes when he wished her luck. That last part stayed with her. A man who gives you a key shouldn't have to look away to do it. The walk out took most of the afternoon. By the time the farmhouse came into view, the light was going gray and gold behind the hills. It was a tall, narrow place with a sagging porch and windows like dark eyes. The fields around it had gone to weed and bramble. A barn leaned tiredly off to one side. And past all of it, where the cleared land gave way to the tree line, the woods stood thick and silent and watching. She told herself it was just a house. She said it out loud, in fact, because the sound of her own voice was the only company she had. Just a house, Della. Walls and a stove and a place to lay your head. The baby kicked once against her ribs, hard, as if it had its own opinion on the matter, and she pressed a hand there and kept walking. The key fought her, but the door gave. Inside, everything was draped in dust and gray light. Furniture still sat where the old man had left it. A coat on a hook, a coffee cup on the table, the dregs long dried to nothing. It was as though Amos Caldwell had stepped out for a moment 6 years ago and simply never come back. That, more than anything, put a cold finger down her spine. A house people leave is one thing. A house a man walks out of mid-cup is another. Folks don't abandon their own coffee. Something takes them from it. She built a fire in the stove with wood from the porch. She ate the last of her bread, and that was when she heard it the first time, a scratching at the back door, soft, insistent. She opened it, and there on the step stood a dog. A hound by the look of him, though he was so thin she could count every rib. His coat was matted and his eyes were huge in his bony face. He didn't growl. He didn't beg. He just looked at her steady, like he'd been waiting on that porch a very long time and had finally seen the right person walk up the road. Della had nothing to give, but she tore her last bread heel in half and held it out anyway, and the dog took it gentle as a lamb. She ran her hand down his knobby spine and felt him lean into her palm, and something in her chest that had been clenched tight since Tom died came loose just a little. "I'll call you Barley," she said. "Don't know why. You just look like a Barley." She let him in out of the cold, and for the first hour all was peaceful. The dog curled by the stove and she sat across from him, and for a little while the dead house felt almost like a home. Then Barley got up. He walked to a low door tucked beneath the kitchen stairs, a warped little door she'd taken for a pantry, and he began to scratch, and whine, and scratch again. She called him off twice. He came to her, sat, leaned his head against her knee a moment, and the instant she turned away he was back at that door, clawing the wood low in his throat, a sound she'd never heard a dog make. Not anger, not hunger. Grief almost, like he was trying to reach something on the other side that he had loved. And no matter what she did, he would not stop. She tried everything to settle him. She held him. She talked to him soft, the way you'd talk to a frightened child. She blocked the door with a chair. He pushed the chair aside and went right back to it, claws raking the wood until his pads bled and left small red smears on the boards. She thought about that key the teller couldn't look at, and the coffee cup, and the man who walked off mid-sip and never came home, and a small cold idea began to take shape in the back of her mind. By midnight Della understood she was not going to sleep, not with that sound, and not with the question it had planted in her head. What was down there that a dog would tear his own feet apart to reach? She found a lantern in the kitchen and shook it. There was oil enough. She found a crowbar leaning in the corner by the stove, the iron cold and heavy in her hands. And though every sensible part of her said to wait for daylight, the bigger part of her, the part that was tired of being afraid of everything, decided she was done waiting. A person can only stand so long at the top of a thing they're frightened of. Sooner or later you go down, or you spend the rest of your life listening to it scratch. It took 3 hard pulls to free the warped door. When it finally gave, that cold air came up at her, thick and wrong, carrying the smell of old earth and something underneath it she couldn't name. Barley shot past her legs and vanished down the dark stairs. Della went after him with the lantern high. The steps were stone, slick and uneven, and she kept one hand flat on the wall and the other locked around the lantern handle, testing each step before she gave it her weight. The cellar opened up around her, low-ceilinged, packed dirt floor, shelves of broken jars. And at the far end where the lantern light reached, she saw 2 things that did not belong. The first was a wall. A wall of brick, newer than everything around it, the mortar slapped on rough and quick by hands in a hurry. It cut straight across one corner of the cellar, sealing off a space behind it. Whoever laid it had not cared how it looked. They had cared how fast it went up. The second was a wooden crate, big as a coffin, nailed shut, sitting square in the middle of the floor like it had been set there to be found. Barley stood over it, trembling, pressing his nose to the seam and whining that same broken whine. She knelt by the crate, and that was when she saw the scratch marks. They were on the inside, deep gouges torn into the wood from within, as if something had been shut in there and fought with everything it had to claw its way out. Della's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped the lantern. But she set her jaw, wedged the crowbar under the lid, and pulled. The nails shrieked. The lid came up, and what was inside that crate was not a body. It was bundles, dozens of them, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with string. With trembling fingers she unwrapped the first, and the lantern light fell across a stack of paper money thicker than her wrist, and beneath it, gleaming dull and yellow, a row of gold coins. She just knelt there. She couldn't breathe. There was more money in that crate than she had seen in her whole life put together, more than Tom could have earned in 20 years of breaking his back in the timber. She unwrapped another bundle and another, and they were all the same. Cash, gold, a small fortune hidden in a sealed crate in a dead man's cellar. And underneath it all, at the very bottom, lay a leather ledger gone soft with damp. She lifted it out and opened it by the lantern. The handwriting was cramped and careful. It was a journal kept by Amos Caldwell, and the early pages were dull as dust. Crop yields, the price of feed, the weather. But she turned to the back, to the last entries, and there the careful writing turned ragged and rushed. They came again tonight, Amos had written. Cyrus Vane and 2 of his men. He knows I never trusted the banks. He knows what I've put by. He says I'll sign the land over or I'll regret the day I was born. I bricked the rest up in the cellar where he won't think to look. If I'm gone before this is read, the money is for whoever the good Lord sends to live in this house after me. They'll need it more than the dead. Take care of my dog. He's all the family I've got left, and he's a faithful old soul. His name is Barley. Della read that last line 3 times. Then she looked down at the trembling, half-starved hound pressed against her side, the dog that had waited 6 years on a dead man's porch for someone, anyone, to finally come home. And she understood that this dog had not led her to a fortune. He had led her to the one thing Amos Caldwell had asked of the world before it swallowed him whole: to be remembered, to be cared for. Delamere Foster carried that crate up the cellar stairs, one bundle at a time, both hands cradling her belly on every trip so she wouldn't fall. She set it all on the kitchen table. She fed the stove until the room went warm and gold. She heated water, made a thin broth from a tin she'd found in the pantry, and shared it with the dog spoon by spoon. And for the first time in 4 months, since the morning they'd carried Tom out of those woods on a plank, Della felt the iron band around her heart loosen all the way. Her baby would be fed. Her baby would have a home. She'd been given a roof and a fortune and a faithful dog all in the span of one night, and whatever ghosts lived in this house, she decided, they meant her no harm. They had been waiting to give her a gift. She sat down at the table, rested her swollen feet, and let herself smile. Barley laid his head in her lap and sighed, a long, contented sound, and his eyes drifted shut. The fire popped. The wind settled. And Della closed her own eyes and thought, for one perfect, foolish moment, that the worst of her life was finally behind her. It was the wind that woke her, or so she thought. A cold draft sliding across the floor, the kind that only comes when a door has opened somewhere. Barley's head came up first. A low sound started in his chest, not a whine now but something darker, the growl of an animal that has caught a scent it knows and hates. Della opened her eyes. The fire had burned to embers. And standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the dark front room, dripping rainwater onto the floorboards, was a man she had never seen. He was lean and gray, with a face like a fence post left out too many winters, and eyes that moved over the bundles of money on the table the way a starving man's eyes move over food. He smiled at her, slow, and the smile never reached anything human. "Evening, ma'am," he said. "Looks like you found old Amos's nest egg. I've been wondering for 6 years where that stubborn fool hid it. And right there in that one sentence, Della's whole world changed shape. This was not a poor widow's lonely struggle anymore. This was not ghosts and gifts. There was a man in her house who had been watching from the tree line, waiting, and he had come for the money. The man from the journal. The man who had made Amos Caldwell vanish off the face of the earth. And he had found her alone, 8 months gone, with no neighbor for 4 miles and no soul who knew she was even out here. "You're Cyrus Vane," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. His smile flickered. "So he wrote about me. Old Amos always did keep a record." He stepped into the kitchen, slow, in no hurry at all, the way a man moves when he believes the door behind you leads nowhere. She saw the long knife sheathed at his hip and the cruel patience in the way he moved. "Doesn't matter. You read it, you know how this goes. That money's mine. Been mine since before you were even a thought. I just couldn't ever find where the old man tucked it. He took his time about it too. Watched this place for years. Watched the bank give up on it. And then one rainy night a girl walks 4 miles up the road and lights a fire, and I think to myself, well now, maybe she'll do my looking for me." He looked at her belly and his face didn't change at all. "Pity. You seem like a decent enough girl." Della's hand crept toward the edge of the table. "Now here's the thing you have to understand about a moment like that one. Fear doesn't make you brave. It can't. But love can." And the thing growing inside her, the only piece of Tom she had left in this world, was worth more to her than her own life 10 times over. So when Cyrus Vane took another step toward that table, Della Mee Foster did not freeze. She stood up slow, both hands on her belly, and she put herself between that killer and the door. "And before I tell you what happened next, let me say this. If you're still with me, if your heart is pounding the way mine was when I first learned this story, do me one small kindness and hit that subscribe button. Stories like Della's deserve to be remembered. That's the whole reason I tell them. Now, back to that kitchen. Get out of my house," Della said. Cyrus laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "Your house," he shook his head. "Honey, this here is the Caldwell place and everything in it is owed to me." He drew the knife and the firelight slid along the blade. I tried to be polite. He moved, but he had forgotten the dog. Barley came off the floor like something shot from a gun. 60 pounds of half-starved hound, all grief and loyalty turned to fury, and he hit Cyrus Vane high on the arm and sank his teeth into the bone. The man screamed. The knife clattered across the floorboards. He swung wild, fist hammering down on the dog's ribs, and Barley yelped but did not let go, would not let go, jaws locked on the arm that had once belonged to the man who killed his master. Della did not stand and watch. She moved. She grabbed the cast-iron skillet off the cold stovetop, the heaviest thing within reach, and she swung it two-handed across the back of Cyrus Vane's head. The clang of it filled the whole house. The man staggered. Blood ran down through his gray hair. He turned on her, dazed and roaring, and shook the dog loose at last, flinging Barley hard against the wall. The hound hit the boards and lay still, and something broke open in Della then. She swung the skillet again, but this time Cyrus was ready. He caught her wrist in one big hand and wrenched it until the pan dropped, and then he had her by the front of her dress, dragging her up onto her toes, his bleeding face an inch from hers. "You and that mutt," he snarled. "You're going down in that cellar with old Amos, right behind that wall. Nobody'll ever come looking. Nobody ever does." So that was where Amos had gone, behind the brick. Della understood it all in one cold flash, and she understood that this man meant to do the very same to her and her unborn child, and that no one in the whole wide world would ever know. She did the only thing left to her. She let her legs go out from under her, dropping her full weight, and as Cyrus lurched to hold her up, she drove her thumb straight into his bleeding eye. He howled and let go. Della hit the floor hard, the breath knocked out of her, pain flaring across her belly. She scrabbled backward across the boards. Her hand closed on something cold. The knife. His own knife kicked into the corner during the struggle. She got it up in front of her with both hands just as he came at her again, blind in one eye, mad with pain and greed. And from the corner the dog moved. Barley wasn't dead. Hurt, dazed, dragging one back leg, but alive. And when he saw that man lunge at the woman who had fed him his first meal in years, the old hound found one more charge in his broken body. He clamped down on the back of Cyrus Vane's leg. The man pitched forward off balance, arms flung wide, and he fell onto the blade Della was holding. It was not something she chose. It was not something she could have stopped if she'd wanted to. His own weight and his own momentum carried him down onto his own knife, and the two of them ended up on the kitchen floor in the gray light of the dying fire, his eyes very wide, a red stain spreading across his shirt. He looked at her with something almost like surprise. Then the breath went out of him in a long rattle, and Cyrus Vane was still. For a long moment the only sound in that house was Della's own ragged breathing, and the soft whimper of the dog crawling across the floor to press himself against her side. She wrapped both arms around Barley and held on, and the two of them shook together, and outside the rain came down soft and steady on the dead fields. She did not sleep again that night. She sat with her back against the cupboard and the dog in her arms and the body across the room, and she waited for the dawn the way a drowning person waits for the surface. When the sky finally went pale, Delamere Foster walked 4 miles into Marrow Creek with her swollen feet aching at every step and the wounded dog limping at her heel, and she told the sheriff everything. She had braced herself to be doubted. A widow with a dead man in her kitchen and a crate full of money on her table. She thought she might hang for it. But the law had been carrying Cyrus Vane's name a long time. The sheriff went pale when she said it. Turned out Vane had been wanted in 3 counties for years, suspected in the disappearance of more than one lonely old soul with savings tucked away and no family to ask after them. And when the deputies went out and took down the brick wall in that cellar, they found what was left of Amos Caldwell behind it, just as he'd written it might one day be found. They buried the old man proper in the churchyard with a stone and his right name, 6 years too late but better than never. There was an inquest. There always is. But no jury in Tennessee was going to punish a widow 8 months gone for defending her child against a known killer in her own home. They ruled it what it was, self-defense. And the money, every bundle of it, the cash and the gold both, the court found belonged to Della. Amos Caldwell had written it plain in his own hand, witnessed by the date and the despair in the ink. For whoever the good Lord sends to live in this house after me, they'll need it more than the dead. Della had it read aloud at the courthouse, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room when the clerk got to the last line. "Take care of my dog." She did. Her son was born 3 weeks later, on a clear cold morning with the first real snow dusting the fields. A neighbor woman who'd heard the whole story came out to help with the birthing and stayed 2 days after, and that was the beginning of Della not being alone anymore. The boy came into the world squalling and red and perfectly whole, and when the midwife laid him on Della's chest, the very first thing that happened was that Barley climbed up onto the bed, uninvited, and laid his graying head down beside the baby's, gentle as anything, and sighed that same long, contented sigh he'd given the night he first came in from the cold. She named the boy Amos. Amos Thomas Foster. For the old man who'd left a fortune to a stranger he would never meet, and for the husband she'd buried in the timber. 2 good men who never got to see the home that their leaving made possible. The money changed everything, the way you'd think it would, and also not at all in the ways that mattered most. Della fixed the roof and the sagging porch and the leaning barn. She bought a cow and chickens and seed for the spring planting. But she did not move to town, and she did not buy fine things, and she did not forget for one single day where any of it had come from. Every autumn, on the anniversary of the night she found that cellar, She walked into Marrow Creek and laid flowers on Amos Caldwell's grave. And every year she brought the dog, until the dog grew too old and too slow for the walk, and then she went alone and told the old man how Barley was getting on. He got on a good long while, longer than anyone expected from a hound that had nearly starved waiting on a porch for 6 years. He slept by the stove every night of the rest of his life, and he followed little Amos around the farm like a shadow, and when the boy took his first steps, it was a fistful of Barley's loose fur that he hauled himself up on to do it. The dog that had clawed his own paws bloody trying to reach his lost master had found, at the very end of everything, a new boy to keep. And he kept him faithful, the way he'd kept the first one, right up until the gray morning he didn't wake up by the stove, and Della buried him out under the big oak where he could watch the fields. She lived in that house the rest of her days. The dead house, they'd called it, the place nobody would set foot in. By the time Della Mee Foster was an old woman herself, with her son grown and married and his own children running through those same rooms, folks in Marrow Creek called it something else entirely. They called it the Foster place, and they said it was about the warmest, happiest home in the whole county, and they'd half forgotten it had ever been anything but. But Della never forgot. On the quiet nights, when the wind settled and the fire burned low, she would think back to her very first night under that roof. A widow with nothing, a house full of ghosts, and a sound at a low door beneath the kitchen stairs. Claws raking at wood in the dark, over and over, a half-starved dog refusing to give up, trying with everything he had to lead her to the thing she needed most. She used to be afraid of that sound. By the end of her life, it was the sweetest thing she could remember, because that was the night the dead house gave up its secret. The night a faithful old hound paid back a kindness 6 years in the waiting. And the night a poor pregnant woman who had lost everything walked down a dark set of stairs and came back up with a whole new life waiting in her arms. That's the story, and every word of what it teaches is true. Sometimes the thing scratching at your door in the dark isn't something to be afraid of at all. Sometimes it's just love, the patient kind, trying to show you the way home. Word count: 5,002 words within the 4,805,200 target. The hook is unchanged at exactly 150 words, the ending is preserved verbatim, and the added length all lives in the middle. The bank decision, the night of scratching, the descent, and the Cyrus Vane confrontation.